So good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to kick off with our second information webinar for the Bank of Ireland Begin Together Arts Fund in partnership with Business to Arts and Arts and Business Northern Ireland. So just to give you a bit of some housekeeping and information for this webinar. So this is the second webinar that we've done this week, and we had a preliminary, more general information webinar on Tuesday, which was recorded and is hosted on our Business to Arts YouTube channel. Similarly, this webinar will be recorded and also will be posted on the Business to Arts YouTube channel later on this afternoon. So as this is a webinar format, you can't see each other in terms of anyone who has joined us today. All you're able to see are ourselves and the other presenters. So who we have today are myself, Eileen Hanratty. I am Senior Manager of Membership and Projects at Business to Arts. We have Brona Whittaker, who is Head of Arts at Arts and Business Northern Ireland, and then my colleague Hannah Lamont, who is Membership and Project Manager at Business to Arts. And as we go through this webinar, we've got a number of slides that we're going to go through, and we're going to give you as much information as we can in relation to audience, budget and evaluation in relation to the fund. As we go through the slides, if you have any questions or any thoughts come to mind, do pop them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. There will be time for a question and answer session at the end of this webinar. So don't worry that you have to kind of store your question, just pop it in and we'll be able to come back to it at an appropriate time in the webinar. So just to give you a very brief overview of what we're going to cover today. So we're going to do a very small overview of the actual Bank of Ireland Begin Together Arts Fund. Generally, just give some information around criteria, around grant amounts and timelines, things like that. We're going to touch briefly on grant writing tips as well, just to give you some information that we've noticed as we go through these different processes, particularly thinking back to round one that we held just before Christmas. And then we're going to go into a bit more detail in terms of the audience evaluation and budget itself. So we're going to talk through a bit more in depth around those things, and just to try and help you be able to craft a bigger and better application this time round. And then we're going to have our question and answer session at the end. But as I said, drop any questions into the Q&A function as you go through, and we'll come back to it at the end of the webinar. So just going to move on then to the actual overview of the fund, which my colleague Hannah will take us through now.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining, and apologies, I'm sharing my screen and I don't know what this little window is popping up, so hopefully you can still see the slides all right. Technology is friend or foe. So I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview of the Arts Fund that we are talking about here. And as Eileen said, we already did a general overview and a more of an in-depth overview of the fund on Tuesday, so you can watch that back on our YouTube. But just while we're here, so the fund aims to distribute €1 million between 2020 and 2022, and it's designed to support artists and arts projects across the island of Ireland, both north and south. We're open to all arts forms for projects, and we would like to welcome projects that benefit a range of audiences. We're also open to projects which enhance the well-being of communities and the audiences involved. So that's something that we're really emphasising in this round of the fund. It's something that we saw was very successful in our last round of the fund, and that's something that both Bank of Ireland and Business to Arts want to emphasise. The fund aims to support artists or groups of artists to work with a partner organisation. So that could be a venue or event, an arts organisation, a community or voluntary organisation, or another funding agency or organisation. And the projects could be new or existing artworks that have been adapted due to COVID-19 or are in response to or inspired by COVID-19. And so as you can see there at the bottom of my screen, the timeline for this round of the fund, the applications are currently open. They opened on May 5th and they will close on the 23rd of June. And we hope to notify all applicants, either successful or unsuccessful, by August 31st. And then the projects should aim to take place between December of this year, so December 1st, 2021, and December 31st, 2022. And the range of grants that we would like to give out is between €3,000 and €10,000, or the sterling equivalent of that. In the last round of the fund, the average fund amount per project was in and around €8,000. So average grants will be between €5,000 and €8,000, we estimate. So just to keep in mind in terms of the amounts of money that you are submitting in your application for or requesting your application. We're going to be focusing, as Eileen mentioned, on some grant writing tips and some pieces around audience evaluation and budget in this webinar. So I'm going to hand over to Brona now to just give her insights about the top tips for grant writing and any insights she has in this area.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to Business to Arts and Hannah and Eileen, as ever, amazing on the organisation front. But it's also wonderful for us to be involved in a fund that is all island. It's really exciting for us to be a part of that, and it's a fantastic opportunity for the organisations we work with. I'm the head of arts in Arts and Business, and I've worked with the organisation for 14 years this week. And part of that remit is around fundraising and supporting organisations with work on applications to charitable trusts and foundations and funds just like this. So this is something that's very prescient, and it's often at the forefront of my mind how I support organisations to make successful applications, and it's something that we've run over ourselves many times. So thinking back to the previous slide, the one thing that I think is always really important is to remember that well-being piece that was in that initial slide, and to show how your application matches the objective of the fund itself. And you know, the panel will want to give out money to fabulous applications, so our job at this point in time is to help them, you know, make our application successful. So there is no intention to hold any money back, so it's as much as possible our goal to help them give it to us. So just be very clear about the questions that they've asked, and really challenge yourself to put yourself in the panel's shoes and see from that objective point of view, have you given them the information they need to give you the money? Be always mindful of the word count, and set yourself a goal to keep the information as clear and concise, because within that word count, it's really helping to tell the story within that section. So making sure that you circle back to what's being asked of you within that section, and that you've really given yourself the chance to give the right information in the right place. Because often the application has a good feeling, but maybe you haven't given them the opportunity to score it in the right way, because like other grant making processes, these are being scored. So just, you know, remembering how you might stack up against any other application. In the initial stages, don't put the money at the forefront of your mind, but think about that impact that the application makes, albeit remembering that the budget has to make sense, and that's going to be covered slightly later. But really thinking initially about how you're selling that application. That notion that people give to people, you want to be able to tell your story and to get the warmth about your organization across. This is a much broader application process maybe than certainly us in the north might be part of. And as an all island process, you might not be known to the person who's reading your application, and actually they'll be loving learning about your organization and the project that you're doing and whatever partners you're working with. So make sure that you bring that story to life, and that you tell the story of what you're trying to achieve. And that leads really nicely into those figures and statistics. So if your project is going to make an impact, how will that impact be realized? If there's a metric to be able to illustrate how you're bringing that impact to life, show them and use them, because it can show the extent of the impact. Again, go back to that application criteria. Do you know that you've covered everything? Are you eligible? It's what, you know, there's so much time can be put into a process like this. What we don't want to do is enable you to put all that time in if it wasn't going to be right in the first place. So just making sure that you've looked at the criteria, and that you're sure that you know what's being asked of you, and that you're in the right place. I often think in applications that I would ask my mother what she would, and whenever I started my career in the theatre in the lyric, and I often place myself in the shoes of people who aren't in that industry. And when I use some of the language that I use, I think, what would my mum say if I said that? Would she think I'm an idiot? So it's just about reminding ourselves of the jargon that we use day to day. There are abbreviations that I use in the north that might be different in the south. So Arts Council of Northern Ireland, Belfast City Council, it's about remembering those abbreviations and what they might stand for. And even organisations who are supporting us, maybe in the field of mental health or well-being, give yourself a chance to expand out those terms so that people know who you're talking about and that you can support them. Again, it's all about helping them to give you the money so you can do what you want to do. So you need to make that job as easy as possible. I know it seems kind of glib to say it, but actually just make sure that it's been spell checked and grammar checked. Sometimes the platforms that we're using, maybe they're not familiar and we might not use our word processing skills in the way that we would have done in the past. Also, we're just so desperate to get the application in. And Hannah and Eileen were just talking there in the little tech check at the start about how we rarely have the luxury of a lot of time because we've got so many competing priorities, but just having that last leap through the application to make sure that everything's as you would want it to be seen by others. As an organisation, we also have a much smaller fund that we give money out through the year. And when our external panel look at the applications, the budget is often the biggest bone of contention within the discussions, because sometimes the calculations maybe haven't come through from an Excel spreadsheet in the way you wanted to, and the numbers just aren't quite as accurate as you'd hope. So just take a second again, that maybe if someone else is looking, you could say, could you just double check that my figures are reading through? Sometimes we can't see the wood for the trees. So it's about asking someone else to have a look and make sure that we've got it all right. I am 100% a last minute Lucy. And even I would say in this situation, don't leave it to the last minute, because so far today I've used my mobile hotspot. I've begged, borrowed and steal in terms of the broadband connection. And I think just at the moment when we're relying on technology so much, give yourself 24 hours just to make sure that there aren't those technical hitches, that there isn't a question around sorry, I've taken a second because the lovely Kwame Daniels has asked a question, and that's the Belfast crew representing big time. So I'm very happy with that. Good to see more Northerners coming in by way of Hackney. But what we want to be able to help you do is to make that as clear as possible. And when you're in that last minute place, you don't necessarily always have the luxury of being able to clarify some of those things that you weren't sure about in the first place. So I think what I heard from some of the applicants who I was in contact with last time was that they got stuck on some of the things around well-being and maybe sort of overcomplicated their approach to the application. Go right back to what you're trying to achieve and just make sure that you know that there's a clear walkthrough of the timeline of what you're trying to do, who you're trying to do it with, and what role each partner plays. And that you're very clear about how that's going to look. And as I say, having that second person. So Hannah, that led quite nicely on to the next slide.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Brona.
No problem at all.
So insightful to hear you speak about it as well.
I was just going to say, as with last time, we're all here. So yeah,
both ourselves at Business to Arts and also our colleagues in Arts and Business Northern Ireland, we're available to answer your questions as they come, and not even just in this webinar. Please do feel free to reach out to us by email as well. Thanks,
Hannah was just saying about that my colleague Adam had mentioned about the audiences. Hannah, this is this slide for me as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. If you wouldn't mind,
because Adam had been in touch with a lot of applicants last time, and we were just trying to reflect back things that might have tripped people up, really, I suppose, or maybe had overcomplicated the thought process. It's thinking about that range of audiences and communities. So where will the project actually happen and why is it important to them? And often when we think about community and what that means to various people, it can take a different meaning on. So where is your project actually going to happen, and who are the project participants? So whether that be artists or the different roles various organizations will play. Who are the intended audience and why is it important to them? We as an organisation like Business to Arts are doing a lot around mental health at the moment and well-being, especially as we come through the period of time we've been through. So why does that intended audience need the work that you're doing, and why is it important at that point in time? And how will you engage the audience and participants? So that clarity around how that project will actually play out, to go back to the previous slide in the discussion around the timeline, how will those various steps of engagement happen? And then the impact, I mean, I'm sure it's the same for all of us. Impact is such a difficult it should be an exact science, but in actual fact, it's such a dense area to report how we make an impact, especially in the area of well-being, because oftentimes benefits can happen months after the initial engagement. So think about what you're trying to achieve and how you'll know you've achieved it. What will show you that you've been successful in what you've been trying to do? And oftentimes, again, with applications like this, it's often that you know that you've thought about that in advance is enough for the person reading application, that you've given consideration to what that success will look like. I'm very fond of a tool called Theory of Change, which I'm sure you all use as well. So when we think about theory of change and we look at how things want to look at the end, it really helps us walk through the process we'll take in order to be sure we've made that change at the end. So the context that we're in isn't just 35 to 45, teenagers, older people. And when we think of the homogeneity of a term like older people, where are those older people? What do they need? Who do they relate to, and how does that happen? Especially in how that relates to the art form that we're talking about, because the relationship between, say, for example, an older group of people with dementia and in a visual arts context is very different to a group of older people who are able to take part in a dance program. So it's really interesting to think about how that relates to the age range or the specific group that you're talking about. Again, in terms of those specifics, it's not the longest form in the world. You know, you want to be able to be succinct about how you communicate that information. And then always relating back to the objectives of your project. The lovely thing about this program, I think, is that emphasis on partnership approaches and having more than one organization involved. And I think there is such strength in that at the moment, because we've been quite lonely as organizations over the last year, and it's often those external connections that have sustained us. So, you know, when we think about those objectives, go back to the partners who are with you in the project and just say, are we all on the same page with the objectives? And actually, maybe I've missed something. Maybe I'm not communicating an objective that we had for this project, and allow them to really reflect on what you're communicating about your project, because their audience as a partner might be slightly different to yours, or maybe bring even more context there than you had already. So it just shows the full level of engagement that you have, because maybe you've missed a group that's really important to them because you were thinking from your own perspective. So just going back to that broader engagement piece.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Brona. It's really great to hear all your insights as well. Again,
I love fundraising applications. I'm a bit of a melter, because I think somebody telling you what they want you to say is a really good thing.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's good for us all to come together and just acknowledge these are the places where time and again, you know, we see artists and applicants letting themselves down, and there are areas that with a little bit more thought, you know, you could get a little bit of a boost into your application. So I'm going to move on to our next slide, which is in regards to the evaluation process. So this was another area where we saw that applications from the first round of the fund lost marks just due to not giving it enough thought potentially, or just not really digging into what we were trying to get at. So Eileen, would you mind going through this with us and giving your insights here?
Yeah, perfect. So just to kind of build on what Brona was saying in terms of the objectives, and really trying to think about what is your project actually going to do in terms of impact, who you're engaging with, how is that going to manifest, the timelines, all of those kind of considerations. So really, whenever we think around an evaluation, that's just the last step in what has preceded all those months before. And really, you're probably already thinking in some way about the evaluation in terms of, you know, what you want to achieve. You're probably going to have outlined how you're going to achieve it. And then, like Brona said, it's about just kind of what does success look like to you. And in terms of the evaluation, it might seem like a very kind of scary word, you know, quite scientific or quite kind of onerous, but really it's just about conveying to us how you will actually understand that your project has been a success, whether that's been through audience participation or other kind of methods. But in terms of the evaluation, it's really key to bring it back to exactly what was your project trying to achieve from the outset. Now, don't worry in terms of your objectives, there might be completely different objectives. Some people want to increase their audience reach. Maybe it's to try and reach a different kind of demographic of people. Maybe it's trying to raise ticket revenue, work with specific communities in certain different ways, develop your artistic practice as an individual artist by working in partnership with an organization and with participants. Maybe that's bringing you in a new direction, and there's lots of other objectives that you might be trying to achieve. And one of the main things to think about is you're not going to really can necessarily know if you're going to be a success in terms of your project until the end. That's perfectly fine. We just want you to kind of have thought about how might you evaluate the project as you go along. So there are certain touchstones in terms of if you're engaging with participants from the outset, or if you're bringing them in at a certain milestone later on down the line. And also think about you from your own individual perspective as an artist, and then also similarly with the organization that you're working with as well, because you might have different approaches to how you evaluate things. And by working together, it can really help you kind of figure out how best you might evaluate together, and rather than all of the onus of that being a one individual person. So do try and leverage and work together with your partner in trying to figure out how might you evaluate. The main things about determining the success of your project when you look back, it's probably going to have some element of data capture in terms of audience attendance numbers. If it's online streaming, how many click-throughs did you have? How many tickets might you have sold? All of that lovely feedback that hopefully you're going to get from your audience in terms of, what a wonderful experience to be able to join in, whether it's remotely or hopefully, fingers crossed, in person. And if you've got participants who are involved, who are actually helping drive the project, and it might go in a completely different direction than where you originally thought, and that's completely fine. Actually, that's probably one of the most exciting things, is really to see how working with participants kind of change the direction in which your project is going to go. But it's about building in anecdotal feedback and just letting the assessment panel know that you're thinking about all of those things and all of those areas that you have got other people feeding into your project, and how you can capture that information. And then hopefully, if you are successful, whenever we ask you for that report, just to kind of check in, let us know how the project has happened. Did it go well? Were there some learnings for the future? All of those kind of nice things, but you've thought about it from the outset and you're capturing that information throughout the project, rather than necessarily having to look back and think about all those great things that happened, but you mightn't have just captured the information at the time, or captured that lovely speaking note that someone made if they happen to be typing it into a chat. Just try and capture all that information as you go along, but do lean on each other in terms of the artist and the partner organization together. One other good thing that we do like to see from an assessment perspective is, why have you chosen these particular ways of evaluation, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, whether you're really assessing the number of people who've participated, or just the kind of that feedback that you're getting from people. Similarly, in terms of impact, we are very engaged with the well-being of communities, so that can be a bit harder to kind of assess that impact. But if you're just thinking about, why have you picked these certain methods to kind of capture the information, and why is it important to you that this is the information you can then share with us in the future, and how might that actually help you in future applications for other funds or other grant opportunities that you have. And really, we're not trying to trip anyone up with these kind of questions. It's more about trying to think a bit more critically about your project, a bit more strategically. And again, that feeds into what Borna was saying about, don't leave it to the last minute. Do try and get other people to participate in the actual application writing itself, so that the burden is shared, and you always have an eye to the future, and you can kind of spend a wee bit more time thinking about what the end result might look like, because you've already probably done 80% of the thinking about a wonderful project that you're going to manifest if you're successful with funding. You know probably from the outset who you want to bring into that project and how you're going to make it work. It's just that final maybe kind of 10% of how you then reflect that back to us and let us know how that was a success or otherwise. But we're just trying to get you to think slightly more into the future, and yeah, just kind of start your planning now for how the end report might look if you're successful. But that's kind of what we mean in terms of an evaluation. So it's really just to kind of help you think about, yeah, how might you tell us that your project was a success, or if you have any other learnings from your project. And that's all we need to know at this point in time, is that you're thinking slightly a bit more into the future about how you might report back. But that's essentially an evaluation. It's not too onerous at this point. It's just to let us know that you've thought about it.
And something that Eileen said there about working together in partnership with as the artist with the partner organization, or vice versa. The system that we use is really great at, it's very user friendly. You can go log in tandem. If you share your passwords with each other, you can go on and add to it over a period of time. So that's really helpful in terms of how it actually works. Do you have a hand up there, Eileen? I feel like there's a
Oh, sorry.
blue thing. Oh,
There's
no,
just a
that's fine.
woohoo. Sorry.
Just these little additional features on Zoom. So I'm going to finish up our presentation before our question round with some notes about the budget. So I know that for me, myself included, I'm not a numbers person. When I see the word budget, I immediately just tense up. But this is here to help you, and this is to help your application. So one thing I will say is that we had a bit of learnings from the first round of the application, because of course this fund is open to projects that have already received funding, as well as those that do not have any funding and will require 100% of the funds from the Arts Fund to proceed with their project. So we learned from that, and in this round of the fund, we actually have allocated out 2 separate budget tables within the application. So the first budget table, it should be your overall project budget, which should include any other funds that you've received. Perhaps you've already received funding from the Arts Council, or you've received a donation amount or anything like that, and how you're using those existing funds and how you've allocated that out. Separate to that, we have a second table, which is how you would use your projected use of funds specifically from the Arts Fund. So we just want to see, how is this contributing to your project, where is it being used, and how, how would this project manifest with or without the funding, just for the assessment panel to know, the impact that the funding would have on your project. In terms of the artist fees, this was a point that a lot of people had questions about in the first round, and we've received a lot of questions about it. So essentially, both our organisations, Business to Arts and Arts and Business Northern Ireland, we advocate for appropriate and proportional artist fees, and that artists are paying themselves appropriately. So based on that, we would like to see that your overall budget is allocating at least 40% of the entire budget to fees to the artist. It's something that is important to us, and that's why we highlight it here. Within the 2 budgets, whether you have an overall budget and your projected use of funds, we would like to see that breakdown of the 40% is going, of all monies is going to the artist fee. Because this is a cross-border initiative, please specify what currency you're working in. It's just for our own knowledge, and so that we can crunch the numbers correctly. Please do include your currency symbols, whether in sterling or in euros, throughout. Also ensure that all of the columns add up. Just do that last minute check, as Brona was saying. If you showed it to your mother, would she approve and make sense of it? Do those last minute checks and make sure everything adds up. Ensure that you have appropriately allocated budget to all of the line items, so that if your project requires transportation or materials, that don't just lump it all into other fees. We have done itemized line items, and you should use them and use as many as you need to. We would like to see in detail how you're spending the money, and be a little bit more specific than vague. I know that's difficult when you're doing estimates, but just try and be as realistic as possible in that respect. The budget should also be reflective of your project. So this was an area where we think people were letting themselves down in terms of, maybe they had a strong elevator pitch for the project, and then you get to the budget and you're kind of thinking, well, this doesn't make sense because it says it's a live stream event, but actually there's been no budget allocated to technology or something like that. So just make it make sense for us. And if you already have the technology, you can say that. It's possible to type in, rather than put numbers, it's possible to type into the budget table. So if you've already received a donation in kind, for example, of technology equipment for your live stream, please say that, and then we can know, okay, that makes sense to us. We just encourage you to think realistically with all of this, and it's not, we're definitely not trying to mark you down in any way or catch you out. We really just want to make sure that everything is making sense, and that we have a good overall view of how the project is going to operate and practically realize itself. So they're kind of my key points about the budget process. And I think somebody had a question the other day on Tuesday should I put in projected sales? You know, there's one thing to say here is that we do want this funding to be, you know, able to propel you forward and in your future endeavors. So if you see an opportunity to create revenue streams from your project, please do. And if that means selling tickets, absolutely, we encourage that. If you would like to generate a revenue beyond the funds that you receive, please do. And you can put that into your budget and into your table there. So I think that is everything that we've covered there now. So I'm going to move on to just taking some questions from our lovely attendees. And Emily is in the background, our colleague, and she's been compiling some questions for us. Eileen, do you see any questions there for us?
I do, yeah. So we have a question here from an organisation that they are an organisation looking to work with an individual artist who also runs their own different arts company. They're just inquiring about, would the first organisation be able to work with this artist as an individual, even if their organisation was applying for a different project? So Hannah, do you want to maybe take that one?
I'm sorry, I was actually looking at the
technology. Oh, you're doing a bit of work, that's fine. No, that's grand.
Sharing and maybe because the technology at the questions thing is giving me a bit of grief. So maybe we'll just be on our viewer mode.
Sure, that's fine. So in terms of this question about an organisation wanting to work with one individual artist who also then has a separate company. So what we would kind of suggest is that we would always recommend kind of putting in your best shot as an application. So if the individual is going to be if the person is going to be the individual artist on one application, that's perfectly fine. Their company could then also do a separate application as the partner organization, but then that artist cannot be the individual artist on a second application. We are trying to limit the applications whereby it's kind of per one individual artist. And similarly with partner organizations, we would ask that not more than one partner organization comes in as the partner on other applications. It's really just to try and think about the best shot that you have and the best project and the most fully developed project that you have to submit to the fund. And rather than the assessment panel perhaps seeing that one artist is involved in a range of projects, will really which one of these is going to be the most impactful or the most beneficial. And it's just, you know, I mean, I don't always say put all your eggs in one basket, but in this instance, we're kind of put it all in, put really good effort into one outstanding application and get it in, rather than trying to split the load. But in terms of that question, you can certainly use the individual artist. Yeah, more than okay for them to come in as the individual partner, and then their organization goes in separately. That's fine. You might just have a bit more work to do in terms of the separate applications, but if you think you're able to do that with plenty of time, that's all good. We have another question here. So Hannah, I might give this one to you. For existing funds, how far do you have to go back? And this person has funding for the project that finishes in June. Does that need to be included?
I feel that if it's contributing to the overall project and how it's going to manifest within the time frame of December 1st, 2021 and December 31st, 2022, it is helpful to show and outline those pieces of information. But if we wanted to speak more specifically, I might need a bit more information from the person who's asking that question. So if you wanted to just send me an email at begintogether@business2arts.ie, I could probably dig in a little bit deeper to that. But overall, we do just want to see, you know, all the steps that you've taken to get the project to the point that in which it will manifest.
So we have another question here in relation to, can you have more than one partner organization on an application?
Absolutely, you can have more than one partner organization. In fact, that's welcomed. There should be a lead partner organization that you are primarily working with on this, but if you are, you know, working in co-commission with other venues, for example, or if you have support from your local authority, please do say that and let us know. You know, we love collaboration and partnerships, and we want to see that in your application. It's something that is, you know, at the heart of Business to Arts and at Arts and Business Northern Ireland is partnerships. So do highlight that. It would only add another strength to your application.
Yeah, perfect. We just have another budget question. So I think lots of things are in budget today. Yeah. Just to clarify, 40% of minimum artist fees, is that to be allocated in both the overall and the Bank of Ireland fund budget?
So the overall project budget. So you can detail the percentage amounts in the actual allocation of the fund table, which is the second table. The first table should have all of your budget outlined as it is in your own spreadsheet at home, and then we want to see that overall you are paying your artists 40% of the overall budget. So I do see someone's been asking, do production teams and stage management count? Yes, we would include all of those creative people and as a part of your artists, and that people are being paid their fees appropriately. Absolutely.
Perfect. Similarly for the budget, this organisation are applying to the Arts Council for the same project, but they won't hear the result until August. Should they include that Arts Council funding in the budget as projected income?
Yeah, I think you can share that as projected income, just to give us the full transparency of your application. And again, the table is really helpful in that you can type text into it. So if you are pending any kind of funding, you can just allude to that. You know, there is a question around, if you did not receive the full amount of funds, would your project still be able to take place? That's an area where you could speak to that. So if, for example, you know, perhaps your project is chosen to be funded and we actually only have, say, €6,000 left to give, wherein you've already requested €8,000. If you've indicated that your project could still proceed with a reduced fund amount, then we would allocate you that money. And so in that space, we would like, in that answer, we would like you to indicate how you would maybe save money, or, you know, how you would adapt if you were not to receive the full amount of funds, but a partial amount of the funds. And in the similar way, if you are you know, basing your project off the assumptions that you're going to receive funding, then we would like to see, you know, how you're going to manage any pitfalls or shortfalls, excuse me, in your budget.
Perfect. Let's see. Yeah. So similarly, just what Hannah said, we've had a question about adding budget line items. So yeah, so the table is fully flexible. So you can write a text answer rather than a numerical answer if you feel you need to give a bit more information. You can also add lines to the budget. So you can just click, there's a small plus button at the bottom of the table. So you can just click that plus and a new line will pop up, and then you can pop in any other expense that you might have that you don't feel has been covered in the previous suggested line items, and that's perfectly fine. There has been another question in terms of attaching some detailed schedules and budgets already made to show plans in detail. So unfortunately not. For the application, we are asking for supplementary information. We are asking for up to 3 photographs or video content to be submitted to show your previous work or the work on this specific project, if you're maybe trying to extend the project or do something different with it, with its adaptation to COVID or has inspired by COVID. We're not accepting any other additional materials such as fully formed budgets, PDFs, anything like that. We're just trying to give the assessment panel as much standardized material as is possible. So all of the entry form is in the written question fields. And then the additional material to add is just some really highly impactful visual imagery of your previous work or video content if you have it, rather than having the assessment panel to maybe run through quite substantial documentation in addition to the entry form, which you've already completed, hopefully to the best of your ability and with loads of time and loads of review. So that's just where we're not able to accept any further budgetary information beyond what's in the table already. If you really don't feel that you can be as clear as possible on the table, just maybe drop us an email at begintogetherartsfund@businesstoarts.ie, and we'll kind of work with you to figure out how best to present the information, but we can't accept any further files or documents.
There's a lot of questions around the budget that are coming through. So someone asked, can you apply for 100% of the budget being from the fund? Absolutely, you can. And we welcome those projects as well. There was another question around, you know, how did, you know, we mentioned that people lost marks or lost standing based on their budget. Again, it's just the points that I covered there, just making sure that everything adds up, makes sense to us, is representative of your overall intentions with your project. and that you're allocating appropriate fees to all your artists and creative workers involved. So you know, there's a lot more detail into what the budget should have on our website through our eligibility criteria documents, and I'm happy to speak to any specific budgetary questions by email, because I know that they can be very you know, they can be very different for everyone. So if you want to reach out to me by email, begintogetherartsfund@business2arts.ie, and I'd happily go through any detailed budgetary issues people are having. So there's a question that's come in here. I have a question around my proposed dates. So if you have to, do you have to have a specific date that your project will take place, or would it be okay to have a proposed window, for example, between February and May of 2022? Brona, do you want to take a stab at this one? It's just around, you know, being elusive about your dates.
Never be elusive about anything is the answer to that question. But I suppose it's just, as Hannah and Eileen have both said, it's about showing the actual, being as clear as you can be about how things are going to happen in the order that they'll happen. The discretion that the panel will use will be around, you know, how realizable those goals are. So it's not necessarily that we'll fall out of the timeline, but it's about being clear when things will happen. That would be fair, wouldn't it, Hannah?
And being